It has certainly been a while for this series, but I wanted to get one more in before the year ended, and I don't have to worry about post-Monster Madness anymore, so that's also a good thing. This should be a bit easier since you know some of the counterparts already, since for some of them, I'm going to be doing the same ones, just for the Marvel side, so that's where the surprises will be. Maybe. Our first film in the Marvel Extended Universe is going to be the counterpart to Man of Steel, and that is Super Soldier in 2013. I explained myself last time that Captain America and Superman are very similar in terms of personality and sort of this old school form of heroism that should never die out. Obviously, power sets are different, but I am mainly doing it from a personality angle. Let's get to the casting. First is Captain America himself, and he would be played by John Krasinski. If you remember from my last group of videos that I got inspired from an article of what if DC was cast like Marvel and vice versa? Well, considering that Krasinski was also one of the runners-up for Cap, and I feel like he would fit in with darker stuff, as he was in darker war dramas like 13 Hours and Jack Ryan. Ironic considering his start, and the fact he did eventually make a cameo as Mr. Fantastic in the MCU, but I still think he would fit here. Then we have the villain, which in this case would be Baron Helmut Zemo. Similar to Zod, he is one of the most popular villains for the character, but not the most popular, i.e. Red Skull for Cap, and Lex for Superman. So I feel like he would work here. And in terms of having a gripe with the main character, the roles would be reversed. Instead of Zod having a rivalry with Jor-El, Superman's father, it's Captain America having a rivalry with Heinrich Zemo, Helmut Zemo's father. He would be played by Michael Shannon because he could fucking handle it. He's an exemplary actor and might as well keep him. There would be flashbacks to Cap's time in the war, and Heinrich Zemo would be played by Russell Crowe. Peggy Carter would be played by Wallace Day, and Bucky Barnes would be played by Tommaso Sanelli. I think there's a chosen few who might know where I'm getting at with that. Now, fast forwarding to the present again, I think Amy Adams would be good as Sharon Carter. It would honestly be a better fit than Lois Lane. Then finally, we would have Nick Fury in this, and he would be played by Andre Braugher. But that is it for the film. A relatively small cast, but there isn't a lot of modern Captain America characters I am that aware of outside of the obvious superhero ones. The story would be Cap waking up in this brave new modern world and trying to find his place, while also discovering that Helmut Zemo is trying to continue his father's work. They eventually duke it out because of this. Next, we have the Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice counterpart with Civil War in 2016. Since I did consider doing Batman vs. Superman, or at least a simpler version for the Civil War counterpart, might as well stick with it here because it makes more sense in all honesty, as well as the fact that Civil War was only done because BVS was announced, so there is that. Now we get into the nitty gritty because there is going to be a lot with this one movie, even more so than the actual BVS. Similar to what Technus Imperative was for the other universe, this is going to introduce a lot of characters. First, there is Iron Man's side with Iron Man himself, played by Timothy Olyphant. Considering he was a runner-up and usually plays darker characters, he would definitely work. War Machine would be played by Harry Lennox. I mean, that would just be awesome. Black Widow would be played by Olga Kurylenko, an actual Russian playing a Russian character. What a thought. Black Panther would be played by David Oyelowo, Scarlet Witch would be played by Samara Weaving, and Spider-Man would be played by Timothée Chalamet, although similar to the comic, he would switch sides. And with that, I think Chalamet would fit into the darker version the MEU in this case would be aiming for. Then for Cap's side, you have Ant-Man, the Hank Pym version played by Aaron Eckhart. Since this version would give zero fucks about the history of Hank Pym, they would use Pym no problem. Then you have Hawkeye played by Mark Wahlberg, darker and more stoic as an actor. Falcon played by Sterling K. Brown. And I can't in good conscience cast Ezra Miller, even though it would make more sense. The person in the background who would be orchestrating everything would be Norman Osborn as our Lex Luthor type, played by Bryan Cranston. He would be using the Winter Soldier as a henchman to get in between Iron Man and Cap, and he would be played by Brenton Thwaites. Other characters include Thunderbolt Ross, played by J.K. Simmons, Howard Stark, played by Cameron Cuff in flashbacks, in addition to the younger Bucky Barnes reprising his role. let's get into the main crux of the story. I'm going to be borrowing a bit from everything. I think there is sort of an animosity between Tony and Steve because Tony doesn't trust his story, as well as believing he is at fault for the destruction caused in Super Soldier. There would also be bouts of demon in a bottle, with Tony being an alcoholic, struggling with being an older hero. Then on top of that, there is someone in the background who is somewhat orchestrating everything, in addition to the Superhero Registration Act being a thing. So all of that combined would be featured here. Next is Suicide Squad, where its counterpart would be Thunderbolts in 2016. Now, this seems rather obvious because the newer versions of the Thunderbolts definitely seem to be ripping off the Suicide Squad. And it's pretty convenient that the Thunderbolts movie was only greenlit after the success of The Suicide Squad, which we will get into soon enough. Michael Shannon would return as Zemo, as well as his heroic alter ego, Citizen V. Then for other characters, there would be Bullseye, known heroically as Target, played by Wilson Bernthal. He would be the Deadshot counterpart, and if it ain't broke. Typhoid Mary, known heroically as Mutant Zero, played by Margot Robbie, who would be the Harley Quinn counterpart. The characters are kind of similar, but Typhoid Mary is way fucking cooler, but they are similar enough. Boomerang, known heroically as Merc, played by Jai Courtney. Both characters use boomerangs. Next, Ghost Rider, known heroically as Blaze, played by Jay Hernandez. He would be the Robbie Reyes version, and while the characters are not really similar, and Ghost Rider isn't even technically a villain either, this is the closest I could come up with. Then you have Lizard, known heroically as Lacerta, played by, I'm going to butcher this guy's name, and I apologize in advance, Adewale Akinwumi Agbaje. Again, not really similar, but both are humanoid reptiles, and I thought that was enough. Enchantress, known heroically as Sorceress, would be played by Cara Delevingne. Both companies have an Enchantress, might as well use them, right? Finally, there is Swordsman, known heroically as Fencer, played by Vincent Cassell. Both he and Zatanna use a sword, that's it. Plus, I thought it would be funny to have Swordsman in there. It would pretty much be Baron Zemo returning after the events of Super Soldier to try and continue his father's work, get revenge on Captain America, and, take over the world. Of course. He would recruit plenty of villains to use as his pawns for his greater schemes. They would pose as heroes while also trying to continue Zemo's plans. So, in that case, the basic arcs for the actual Thunderbolts would be that they start to actually feel like real heroes, and by the end of it, many of them betray Zemo to become actual heroes, although the fate of Zemo is left purposefully ambiguous. Next, we have the Wonder Woman counterpart with Thor in 2017. I already explained myself previously on why they are so similar because they are based around mythologies and are strong warriors, although one is a demigod and the other is a god, but still pretty similar. For Thor, I do genuinely believe that Chris Pine could do a good job in the role. I think he could do starkly serious pretty well, but also have some of that more fish out of water comedy stuff that you could do here. So I would have him as Thor as well as Donald Blake. Then I would have Jane Foster, played by Jessica Chastain. Loki would be the villain, obviously, and he would be played by David Thewlis, although he would fit better as Loki than he did as Ares, ironically. Next are Odin and Frigga, where they would be played by Jeremy Irons and Meg Foster. Then for any supporting cast, there would be Warriors 3, Fandral, Hogun, and Volstagg. They would be played by Ewan Bremner, Zhang Kai, and Danny Houston. Then Lady Sif would be played by Robin Wright. But that is about it. The rough story would follow the same as the first Thor, with some hints of Wonder Woman. Thor would be cast out of Asgard and forced to walk the earth until he became worthy of Mjolnir. He then learns that Loki and the Frost Giants are trying to take over the world and he must stop it. Next up is the Justice League counterpart with Avengers in 2017. Simple enough, just like last time, their premier team for DC would be the premier team for Marvel. Not much to explain there. So, Captain America, Iron Man, Ant-Man, Thor, and Nick Fury would all be returning from previous films. Then we have the additional members who would be Wasp, played by Courtney Cox. I think she would be a good balance for Eckert's Pym, not necessarily comic relief, but sort of this bright-eyed to Pym's more serious portrayal. Then you would have Bruce Banner, and one of the names that was kicking around for the MCU was David Duchovny, and I definitely think he would fit better in a more DCEU-esque Marvel universe than the MCU. Then finally for the villain, I wasn't sure who to go with. I wanted a right-hand man of Thanos, because Thanos would be our Darkseid in this case, played by Ray Porter, because duh. I thought Ronan, because that's who it was in the MCU, but I thought that was kind of lame, so I just picked one of the Black Order Corvus Glaive, and I feel like he fit the best in terms of that character. He would be played by Kieran Hines. It would essentially be the Avengers trying to stop Glaive from invading Earth for its use for Thanos. Then we have the Aquaman counterpart with Namor in 2018. While the Black Panther counterpart is Aquaman for the DCCU, I decided to go for the more accurate one here, even though who knows what the rights would have been in this universe, because that is a severely sticky situation. If I were to take a guess, I feel like in this universe, Marvel maybe never sold the rights to their heroes, but maybe were bought out by another company, maybe Paramount or Sony. So you could explain the darker stuff here, because Disney definitely wouldn't do that. So, with all of that, even though that wouldn't make much sense, but whatever. Anyway, Namor is a fan favorite, and I think it would be great to include him, and it just makes more sense because Aquaman was a ripoff of Namor. Namor, obviously, he would have to be played by Keanu Reeves, even though it would be unlikely that Reeves would ever play a comic character again after his John Constantine movie. He just doesn't seem like that type of guy to join a cinematic universe, but who the fuck else would it be? Nobody would be more perfect, especially a darker iteration that the MEU would be, as well as themes of anti-heroism with the character. So, in terms of other characters, Namor's love interest in this case would be Dorma, played by Gal Gadot. His parents would be Leonard Mackenzie, played by Ian McShane, and Fenn, played by Nicole Kidman. Then for the villain, he would be Atuma the Conqueror, since that is Namor's most popular villain, and an Atlantean, and he would be played by Patrick Wilson. Then for a secondary villain, she would be Lyra, played by Emily Blunt, and then for any smaller supporting characters, they would be Ajort, played by Willem Dafoe, and Argos, played by Dolph Lundgren. The rough story would be Namor fully embracing his darker Atlantean nature, but realizing he is also human and coming to terms with that side of himself after burying it for so long. So a bit of the opposite effect than with Aquaman, which was him fully embracing his Atlantean side after so long. Now we have the Shazam counterpart with Captain Marvel in 2019. Already made my argument for this previously, so let's move on. Now for the character himself, I think he would be played by Dominic West, as we were trying to make it more serious. Again, not too serious, but I think he could make the darker iteration work, since the villain would be the Kree race coming after Cap. Then for the supporting characters, because there are quite a few, in this case due to the original film, I think it would make sense to add Carol Danvers, although non-powered, at least for the time being, and she would be played by Grace Caroline Curry. Then Monica Rambeau, who would have her powers and be going by the name Photon, would be played by Megan Good. Then I would include Rick Jones, as he would eventually become close friends with Mar-Vell. He would be played by Asher Angel. Finally, for bigger parts, I decided to add Star Fox, who would be played by Adam Brody, mainly because he would tease the greater threat of Thanos, who would have another cameo here. In terms of story, this is kind of a tough one due to the characters, despite having the same name, being different in regards to their physiology. One is powered by magic while the other is an alien, but I think I could make this work. Now, it would be a bit more comedy driven, however, it would still be slightly more serious than Shazam, as much as I love the movie. It would be more like a darker action film with slight bits of comedy. It wouldn't be the first time Captain Marvel has dealt with his race, and there would be some history, but it's him realizing he needs help to take down the totalitarian Kree once and for all. Then we have the Birds of Prey / Harley Quinn counterpart, which is Typhoid Mary and the A-Force in 2020. We're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel here, but again, this is the best I could come up with. Typhoid Mary, I already made the argument for. Meanwhile, the closest thing to a Birds of Prey is the A-Force, which is a smaller, women-only team like Birds of Prey. Typhoid Mary is already cast, so in terms of the A-Force, you would have Mockingbird, the Huntress counterpart, played by Yvonne Strahovski, Screaming Mimi, the Black Canary counterpart, played by Teresa Palmer, and then Jessica Jones, the Renee Montoya counterpart, played by Carla Gugino. They have to fight back against Taskmaster, played by Ewan McGregor, because he wants revenge. I would make it so that after Thunderbolts, Typhoid Mary did want to become a hero, like with the bunch of people that betrayed Zemo in that film, and so she wanted to make her own supergroup, and that would be the film, fighting against Taskmaster, who fought the Thunderbolts before and wanted his revenge on Typhoid Mary. Next up is the Wonder Woman 1984 counterpart with Thor 2 in 2020. Simply put, a sequel to Thor. Moving on. Pine and Chastain would return to their roles. The new villain this time around would be Doctor Doom, played by Pedro Pascal. Not really a Thor villain, in fact, barely a Thor villain, but I decided on Doom because I feel like he is kinda similar to what Lord was in this film, with being able to grant abilities. But with Doom, he would do it through his own magic because it's Doom. Then for the smaller villain, it would be Absorbing Man, played by Martin Ford, because like Minerva's cheetah, he was granted his abilities by someone else, although it was Loki and not Doom, but I decided to tweak it, even though Loki would make more sense, but I'm trying to line it up with the actual film and the villain wasn't repeated, so here we are. The tone wouldn't be as cheesy as Wonder Woman 84, even though I don't hate it as much as everyone else does. It would be more along the lines of the first, except maybe slightly more comedic. Now we have a bit of a sidestep concerning Zack Snyder's Justice League with Zack Snyder's Avengers in 2021. I mean, I didn't really need to put this in here because it's essentially a director's cut of the movie we got. It is very different, but not on the grounds that the characters and basic premise are vastly different. I don't really need to introduce a story here or new characters, just to say this also exists in this universe, because why not? Maybe Marvel is just that dumb here as WB is in our universe, but not much to say with this one. Moving on. Now we get to The Suicide Squad with The Thunderbolts in 2021. Another sequel, so not much to explain. So I was unsure on whether or not to bring Baron Zemo back. I ultimately decided against it since it was unlikely that Michael Shannon would come back for another sequel. I know he came back for The Flash, and if he came back for that crap, he could probably come back for anything. However, I wanted to shake it up a bit, so I decided on a new leader and iteration. This time use Bucky Barnes and Hawkeye to lead a more heroic Thunderbolts team, but with villains as well as heroes and anti-heroes. Typhoid Mary and Boomerang would return, as well as Bucky and Hawkeye, obviously. The new characters this time around would be Crossbones, the Bloodsport counterpart played by Sylvester Stallone, Fool Killer, the Peacemaker counterpart played by Josh Brolin, Tiger Shark, the King Shark counterpart played by Stephen Agee, at least the mocap of it, Spot, the Polka Dot Man counterpart played by David Dastmalchian, America Chavez, the closest I could find to a Ratcatcher 2 counterpart, at least in terms of someone who has been in the Thunderbolts in the comics, played by Daniela Melchior, and then with the villain, it is the Mad Thinker, the Thinker counterpart, played by Hugh Laurie. There were a couple other characters that I wanted to throw into the mix here that could work as either characters that are easily killed or have lesser roles like in the original film. Those characters would be Agent X, the Blackguard counterpart, played by Bill Hader, Deadpool, the Savant counterpart, and why fucking not, because Deadpool. And if I have anyone that isn't Ryan Reynolds playing him, I would be found murdered in my bed by tomorrow morning, so Ryan Reynolds it is. As tempting it would be to cast Chris Pratt. Anywho, last and certainly least is Vermin, the Weasel counterpart, mocapped by Sean Gunn. Now, the only reason I included a Weasel counterpart was because Vermin is just kind of too perfect, because it's almost the same exact character, except I believe Vermin has a little bit more cognitive ability, so yeah. Also, I wanted to mention that Javelin, Mongal, and the Detachable Kid aren't going to have counterparts because there's just too many characters, and I already have a lot of characters already, and they don't have proper counterparts. Also, it would be funny if the opening scene in The Suicide Squad happens here as well, and the person to survive is Deadpool, because it would actually make sense and probably be funnier. Here's a bit of a weird one with the Black Adam counterpart with Moonstone in 2022. Going back to actual explanations, and here's a bit of a weirder one. So Black Adam doesn't really have a proper Marvel counterpart. Some say Namor, Magneto, Doctor Doom, in terms of both appearance and personality. But I didn't think those fit in addition to using some of those characters already. However, I came across this character, Moonstone, who kind of fits into the mold of Black Adam. She's depicted as both a villain and as of recently an anti-hero, has the same power set as the hero but evil in a lot of cases, has an insatiable lust for power, and is incredibly intelligent. Honestly, that kind of fits Black Adam. And there have been counterparts in these videos that have had a lot less in common, so I'll take it. Only trouble is that she is more of an adversary of Miss Marvel, as in the Carol Danvers Miss Marvel, but considering she fits in a lot of other areas, I don't think that would matter in the long run. And she wouldn't actually be fighting Captain Marvel here anyway, so whatever. Moonstone would be played by Vanessa Kirby. She could definitely do villains, but has the right amount of charisma to pull off a lead role. Then there is the team that was intended to stop Moonstone, which she eventually has to join to stop the main villain. There isn't really a Justice Society parallel in Marvel, so I ultimately decided on the Defenders, mainly because the team isn't very big and has a random grab bag group of heroes kinda like the Defenders. So for the Hawkman counterpart, Falcon works because he's already established. Then for Atom Smasher, I decided on Ant-Man, the Scott Lang version, at least since he would be a legacy hero, and he would honestly be more Giant Man than Ant-Man, but whatever. He would be played by Taron Egerton. There isn't really a ton of heroes like Cyclone, so I decided to just go with a weather-based hero, and the most popular one is Storm. She would be played by Quintessa Swindell. Then finally, for the most obvious and easiest counterpart for Dr. Fate, Doctor Strange, and he would be played by Jason Isaacs. Then for the villain, I decided on Mephisto due to his demonic roots like Sabbac. The main storyline would be that Moonstone was trying to get more power, and she unlocks Mephisto from some sort of prison, so she has to team up with the Defenders to stop him. He would be played by Pierce Brosnan. Next up is the counterpart for Shazam! Fury of the Gods with Captain Marvel, Fury of the Cosmos, in 2023. It would pretty much have the same cast as before. Captain Marvel, Photon, Rick Jones, a new superpowered Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel, and Star Fox. The villain is a bit tough, so I went through a bunch of villains that Captain Marvel had, and I decided to go with artificial gods created by Isaac from Titan, Thanos' homeworld, only because there were 3 of them and it matched the 3 villains from the actual film. They would be Chaos, deity of space, Dionysus of Titan, and Lord Gaia, played by Zachary Levi, Jimon Honsu, and Helen Mirren. Haven't heard of them? Well, had you heard of the Daughters of Atlas before Shazam 2? My point still stands. Anywho, they would simply be trying to kill Captain Marvel and his merry band of misfits because it was a plan devised by Thanos to stop anyone in his way. He wouldn't make a cameo, but he would be mentioned several times. The climax would involve Tartarus, the god of the abyss, and eventually the villains are all defeated. Now we get to the Flash counterpart with Quicksilver in 2023. This is a pretty basic one. Well, I did use Spider-Man for the original counterpart as I felt that would somewhat make sense at the time, but similar with Aquaman and Namor, I decided to go with the more literal counterpart here. And Quicksilver is honestly the most famous speedster Marvel has outside of like the Wizard, but he's honestly more of a Jay Garrick counterpart, so whatever. Anyway, I decided on Quicksilver mainly because I have a plan for Spider-Man soon enough. And more X-Men characters need to shine here, with me sort of explaining what the rights would be. Anyway, Quicksilver would return from his appearance way back when. There wouldn't be any time travel associated with this because Quicksilver, from what little I know of the character, he doesn't really time travel. I know he has the power of time displacement or time jumping, but he doesn't really time travel like Flash does, which isn't a lot either, but comparatively it's more, especially with Flashpoint continually stuck in people's minds. In terms of other characters, the Supergirl counterpart would be Scarlet Witch, as that would make the most sense, and then the villain, the General Zod counterpart, would be Magneto, really making this a family affair. And then for the Batman counterpart, might as well use Wolverine because he is a character that is frequented as a Batman counterpart. And again, making sense because he's an X-Men character. Might as well have Hugh Jackman here as well. Then for the love interest with barely any role, it would be, and I'm probably going to butcher this name, but I don't care, it's a fictional character, Crystalia Amaquelin. Okay, only love interest that Quicksilver ever had, so I'm going to use her. She would be played by Saoirse Monica Jackson. Simple matter of the twins, but with a focus on Pietro, obviously, trying to defeat Magneto because he's Magneto. Boom, there you go, moving on. For the penultimate film of the MEU, we have Blue Beetle's counterpart, which is the Ultimate Spider-Man in 2023. Alright, so the last one to actually explain. Whenever I would look up a counterpart for Blue Beetle, 2 would come up. The first was Beetle, but he was a villain and not a hero, so that didn't make sense, despite being a literal counterpart with being a beetle-based character. Then the other was Spider-Man. Both are younger heroes given a huge responsibility who crack jokes all the time. Even though I did use the Peter Parker Spider-Man previously, I decided to make it the Miles Morales version, mainly because both are Hispanic, a legacy hero with a popular previous incarnation, and have strong familial roots. So I think that works for both Jaime and than Miles. So, gonna have to do a lot of changing because of obvious reasons. But Spider-Man would be played by Miles Brown, and the villain would be Norman Osborn because he is the closest to Victoria Cord that I could think of, as well as actually being a Spider-Man villain, even if not a Morales Spider-Man villain. The OMAC character would be Green Goblin, being controlled by Norman, who would actually be Harry Osborn, played by Tom Blythe. Obviously, you would have Jefferson Davis, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, Rio Morales, played by Amy Garcia, and Aaron Davis, played by Wesley Snipes. Then for the Jenny counterpart, best I could do was Genki, as that would also work, being his friend who knows tech and that kind of thing. He would be played by, and I apologize for butchering the name, Shingun Sugarlen. But it's essentially the movie we got, with Osborn wanting Miles' power for his own nefarious reasons. Finally, we have the Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom counterpart with Namor 2 in 2023. Lastly, we just have another sequel. Namor, Dorma, and Atuma would all return, in addition to Lyra. Now, since the whole Mera thing is up in the air, the rumor is that she's barely in the movie, being bedridden after a bad fight for most of the movie. In this case, we're just going to kill Dorma off because that's what happens in the comics anyway, and it would be a war-torn revenge path for Namor, along with Atuma to help him carry out that revenge. But that's honestly it. No new characters and a run-of-the-mill storyline. That is it for the MEU, quite literally, since Aquaman 2 is the last DCEU film. So no more after this, even if I wanted to. I guess it would be called the MU now? No idea, but I'm not going to be getting into that. Just officially released films and films that are just about to be released. But that's it for now. But don't worry, this intriguing little project still has a long road ahead of it in the new year. Stay tuned.